Hello and welcome to Lux's webinar 20 for 20, the technologies with the greatest potential to transform the world over the next decade. My name is Andrew Stockwell. I lead Lux's global research, consulting, and product teams, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined today by our speaker, Cosmin Laszlo, who's the Director of Research Products and the leader behind our Lux Intelligence Engine and online client platform. If you have any questions for Cosmin during the webinar, please enter them into the questions box. If you have any questions about Lux overall, you can always email them to questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will be sure to follow up with you directly. So before we do get started, just a quick few words on Lux. So at Lux, our primary reason for existing, our primary reason for being, is to help our clients innovate smarter and grow faster, to make smarter and better decisions about innovation. We do this across customer touchpoints, driving value via experiences based on our proprietary platform of the right data, analytics, and insights to support better decision-making. Also through engagement with our experts, approximately 3/4 of whom have advanced degrees in science and engineering, and with our consultants who create bespoke solutions for our clients' greatest challenges. We look forward to working with you as well. Cosmin, with that, and as a demonstration of our fantastic capability, I think I'll pass things over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. So now we'll jump into the 20 for 20, the greatest potential technologies to transform the world over the next decade. Every year we do this. Every year it's really important for us as a company to look at what are the technologies that we are recommending for clients to really prioritize. What are the technologies that we're focusing our research team on in terms of the reports they write, the startups that they talk to. And essentially the way that we pose this question is, what technologies will you be following this year that have the greatest potential to transform the world over the next decade? We ask this of our research team, we ask this of our data science team, and then through a hybrid approach, we bring together the results into the 20 for 20 list. Now today we're going to be exploring this in 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about the importance of foresight. Why is it important to do these kind of outlooking analyses? And then also diving into the 20 for 20 itself, showing you what the list is and highlighting some of the trends within it. In the second part of the presentation, we're going to talk about some of the key groupings that we have found within the 20 and highlighting some case studies around how do you go deeper on these particular technologies to apply it to your own business. And last, we're going to talk about what to do looking forward. How do you operationalize some of these insights into your own business to apply them to your roadmap? So we'll begin with, why do we need foresight studies and analytics? And one of the key reasons behind this is that new ideas and ideas that can ultimately be winning in terms of opening up massive market opportunities can initially be quite controversial. They can be easy to dismiss. You can miss out on the opportunity until it's potentially too late. So as an example of this, I wanted to kind of look back about 3 years to the release of Apple's Airpods. And when these first came out, their initial reactions were, some people were confused, some people were angry, people were poking fun at them with some memes. As an example of some of those memes, here's an image showing kind of the original earbuds with wires, then without wires, the price increases, then they kind of keep getting smaller and smaller until you get nothing at all for a tremendous amount of money that you're paying Apple. So it's easy to poke fun at this, but looking back at this, now in 2019, 3 years later, this is actually a pretty massive business. If Airpods was a standalone company, its revenues would place it within the Fortune 500 list at about number 384. Now for context, that would make its revenues bigger than the storied chip maker AMD. Is there anything we could do to predict this, right? So this is something that we look at a lot, the foresight that we can bring to questions around innovation and emerging technologies. And we believe that yes, it is possible, if you look at the right data in a systematic way, to anticipate these. And so this is where I want to introduce the Lux Tech Signal. Now, the idea with the Lux Tech Signal is that if you were to look at wireless earbuds and say, how much innovation is happening within the space? You'd probably have to go out and do a patent search You'd have to go out and do an academic paper search. You'd have to pull up all the venture capital funding and so forth, right? It's a lot of analytics, a lot of figures. What the Tech Signal does is it does all those in the background and brings it together into a single figure of merit that traces the innovation interest for technology. And we can see that here on the green for wireless earbuds. So even prior to when Apple launched in 2016, there was increasing interest. And since then, it's continued as more companies kind of jump into the space. So by looking at the right data in the right way, such trends can be anticipated and we can flag them to act upon. So let's talk a little bit more about that data. Our data science team looks at how every day we have 9,000 new patents coming in, 6,000 new academic papers. Every year, about $1/3 of $1 trillion gets spent in venture capital funding for all sorts of different startups. So we bring together these data sets and more into a central data lake, and we analyze them to put together things like the Lux Tech Signal. And we don't just do this for a single technology, but we do this at scale for more than 3,000 technologies. And we keep updating this every single day, so we always know what's at the top of the list. Now, that alone is not enough. We really believe in a complementary approach where we bring in Analyst Insight as well. So this is the domain experts that Andrew mentioned earlier, where our analyst team helps to sift through to understand, well, this innovation score might look great, but there's actually a really important technical roadblock that you're going to run into. Or the innovation score doesn't look so hot so far, but this unmet need is so important, people are going to keep chipping away at it until they make it work. So that's the approach behind this. Now the results for 2020, here's the list of the top 20 transformational technologies. So again, this looks very different than the list that we had in 2019 and then in 2018, because the space is so dynamic. Innovation is changing so rapidly, especially now, where a lot of digital innovations, they might come to market within 3 or 5 years rather than 10 or 20 years, as we might have seen for more conventional technologies. And as you go down this list, you see things within digital, mobility, materials, energy, agri-food, a really nice diversity of emerging innovation trends that you can jump onto. We're not going to go into all of these today, but on our platform, you can explore each of them in depth. We have tech pages, reports, and a lot of in-depth coverage around it, but we will highlight 1 or 2 of these in the space that we have time for today. And so with that, I want to switch gears to the second part of the webinar, which is really around key themes and case studies that emerge out of this, because it's not enough just to have the list itself. Execution matters. How do you avoid pitfalls? How do you find successful strategies to really bring this to your business? So to avoid pitfalls, these are really key mistakes to watch out for when you're trying to find growth via transformative technologies. They vary by the type of technology you're looking at, and we have segmented them out into a number of different types. It's also important to find strategic approaches for how to succeed. So these are really best practices for how to adopt these emerging transformative technologies for your business. So I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of different themes that emerge when we look at the 20 technologies. One of them is Renaissance technologies. These are technologies that maybe you heard about 5, 10, 15 years ago, but they ran into some hurdles. And now in 2020, as we look forward, they're back around. They might have solved some key hurdles, and now they are ready for moving further and integrating into your business. Platform technologies, these are broader technologies where you bring together an entire ecosystem. You can think of, for example, the smartphone, where things like Uber and the shared economy for mobility were really enabled by this platform. And lastly, we have breakthrough technologies, things like wearables, for example, that invent entirely new categories that can sell to consumers things that they have not had access to before. And I want to highlight that one in particular, breakthrough technologies. And one of the breakthrough technologies that's really interesting on this year's 2020 list is quantum computing. Now, for quantum computing, we're going to talk about pitfalls and strategic approaches. And when we look at breakthrough technologies, one of the pitfalls is really trying to invent the future unilaterally, trying to spend billions of dollars on fundamental blue sky R&D. This might have worked for large corporations in the past. Think of Bell Labs, for example. But for most companies today, this is not the right way to play these emerging opportunities. Instead, a much better approach, a strategic approach here, is to tap into the initial R&D leaders' emerging product portfolios to test breakthroughs for you and your business. So what does that mean for quantum computing? Well, let's start with what quantum computing is. When we look at quantum computing, we're talking about a new computing architecture that uses quantum mechanical qubits to do things that conventional computers cannot. This is a really interesting area because it's still relatively early stage, and we see this with a lot of breakthrough technologies. When we dug into the data and we looked at how much academic research is being done here versus how much patenting activity is happening from large companies, the ratio is pretty lopsided. It's about 5-to-1 in favor of academia. And it really highlights how early stage this technology is, but it is making rapid progress. Now, the Lux take on this space, we really encourage looking to find partners within the quantum computing ecosystem. But at the same time, as you do that, communicating within the business that quantum computing is really long-term impact, potentially very disruptive, but not something that's really going to move the needle on your revenue within the next quarter. Now, as an example of the pitfall that we talked about earlier, I wanted to highlight this Nature paper. So this was recently on the cover of Nature in October 2019. And this is a really fascinating study by, it's a collaboration between Google, specifically their Google AI arm, which does some quantum computing, and UCSB. Now, because Google has kind of these moonshot projects, they were able to bankroll this fundamental science R&D and achieve this really interesting breakthrough. But for the vast majority of companies, this is just not possible. The budget's not there, the long-term thinking is not there for this kind of approach. But instead, there's actually a really rich quantum computing ecosystem that companies can tap into. So what this is a market map that Lux Research has put together. We segment it into software, hardware, security, labs, and research. And so a lot of the primary research, the startups that we talk to, as well as the secondary research, our data science team finding interesting startups via all of the different sources that we have access to. We pull this together into this market map, and this is available on our platform to the clients that work with us. And looking at this, we can certainly see that the Google case study we just mentioned is on here, but also there's some really interesting other companies that we can talk about. And so this brings us to that strategic approach where we can find quantum computing partners that can impact your business today. Some of these include HQS Quantum Simulations. This is a company that can help solve problems that you may be facing today measurably faster than a conventional computing approach. It might not be an impossible problem, or it might not be 2 or 3 orders of magnitude faster, but it's still a noticeable improvement that you can tap into today. Another approach is to do those calculations and that problem solving more accurately. And that's something that the startup OTI is focusing on. Or you might want to keep your existing tools rather than replacing them, but provide tangential results. And that's what Protein Cure is focused on. So some different approaches here, but a really rich ecosystem that you can tap into for this breakthrough technology. And so while there's a lot more technologies that we can talk about out of the list of 20, we want to switch gears now in this third act and talk about what to do looking forward. How to be alert for transformational technology. Number one, really having a data-driven process in place as well as expert-led monitoring, having those two work together. And we see this as being important, for example, in Renaissance technologies, where it's not enough to assess an area once. You might have looked at hydrogen 5 years ago and said, it's not for us. The market's not right, the timing's not right, something else might be off. But now it's back and it's worth reconsidering again. So having that process in place for ongoing monitoring is really important. And to do that well at scale, that combination of experts and data, we think is really, really important. The second point we wanted to bring up is casting a wide net. So for these enabling platform technologies, it could sometimes be difficult to see, why, for example, the smartphone might eventually disrupt the mobility industry. But that's the opportunity and the threat that these platform technologies bring. So now more than ever, it's incredibly important for business executives to have a wide lens on these platform emerging technologies. And number three, the final point is really to think imaginatively about breakthroughs. When we look at, for example, quantum computing, it can be difficult sometimes for a business to say, how will quantum computing transform what we do? Is it really going to have an impact? It's often not obvious, but it's important to not dismiss the possibilities too early as you kind of keep an eye on these potentially breakthrough technologies that could one day disrupt the market that you're in. And so with that, I want to thank you very much for your attention, and we'll switch gears now to the Q&A part.
Thanks so much, Cosmin. Tremendously exciting, compelling content. Obviously, just scratching the surface of the depth of insights of our team and the data that we have that supports our conclusions, and of course, the 20 for 20 list. So I hope everybody on the phone will have an opportunity to look through the list in more detail and send us some questions. As you were talking, we actually did get a couple of questions from the audience that have come through. A reminder that if you have not had a chance to ask a question, want to ask a question, please enter them into the questions box on the screen. So this first one that came through, Cosmin, is interesting because there's been a lot of talk about machine learning. And this question is essentially saying, hey, Cosmin, hey, Lux team, why isn't machine learning on this list? Isn't it a critical technology to track?
Absolutely. That's a great question. It's something that we debated pretty hotly in putting together this list, because machine learning was very much, it was actually at the top of the list in 2019 and 2018. And what we've seen as we track the space is that machine learning is becoming so broad and so widely used that the term is almost losing its meaning in a way. And so as we put down the 20 for 20 list, we wanted to break it out more finely and really get specific about the areas of machine learning that have now grown so big and the opportunities are so significant that we want to highlight them in and of themselves. So for example, natural language processing is one of the, is on the list. And that's a subset of machine learning that we're seeing find a lot of traction. So to summarize, it's still very much on the list, but it's kind of broken out in more detail to make it more actionable.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll continue to see that with lots of these groups of technologies that just become bigger and bigger and more complex.
Absolutely.
So that was one question. Another question that came up, and it came up in a couple of different streams from audience members, is how can companies set up technology monitoring like this internally? I mean, obviously we do this for our clients every day in the 3,000 technologies that we track, but are there any best practices Lux can recommend for how companies who are on the phone can do this sort of similar technology monitoring?
Definitely. Yeah, we've been working internally and with clients for a while, so we certainly have thoughts to share on that. One of them is just to get started, get a work group together where you identify 3 or 5 key folks across the different business units that would be stakeholders in this, and set up a cadence. Every 3 months, every 6 months, we're going to get together and work on this list of technologies that we want to watch for. Then as you get a good process in place, really making it as data-driven as possible. Everybody kind of has their own gut takes given on the pet projects that they're working on or things that they know best. But having that data-driven methodology to help out with the discussions as well, to back up some of the conclusions, that's important as well. And I think once you get to that stage, once you've prioritized, here's the stakeholders, here's the time frame we're looking at as our business, here's the unique industry view that we bring to this. Once you have that in place, that's when you're ready to work with external partners to figure out, okay, where do I get the data? Where do I get the analytics to help take my effort to the next level?
Okay, that's great advice. I think we have time for a couple of more questions. Another question that came up, and this might have been prompted by the machine learning question. So we talked about why isn't machine learning on the list? Now this question is more about why is blockchain on the list? Isn't that a super overhyped technology? I mean, I'm sure many people on the phone get a CEO or a senior level executive who comes back from a conference and says, what's our blockchain strategy? So blockchain is on the list, but Is that too overhyped? I know from my own personal experience that last year, I don't think we had it quite as high.
Yeah, last year it just snuck in, and now it's a little bit higher. Blockchain is probably the most controversial one on the list. It is receiving an incredible amount of hype, and I think because of that, it's easy to miss the true long-term potential that we are genuinely excited about. And part of the compounding factor there is also, you look like things like like the blockchain and Bitcoin, and people tend to mix the two together, and there's kind of even more hype out of there. Frankly, for the majority of use cases that people are considering blockchain for today, we don't think it's a good fit. So we do think that people do need to be careful about the hype. That being said, there's definitely a subset of problems for which blockchain is incredibly well suited for. And if we think about 3 years, 5 years down the road, those are opportunities we're really excited about in shipping, in logistics, in some other specific industrial applications. So we do think there's substance there, but it's easy for folks to kind of get jaded by all the hype that is happening in the public sphere.
Got it. So probably some tangible advice for our listeners is don't just take it at the surface level of blockchain, but really think about the practical applications of the technology to business issues or areas that are causing transactional friction, or areas that where an application of it might have a very specific benefit instead of just thinking about it too broadly.
Exactly. And one of my colleagues, Shriram, who leads some of our digital coverage, actually put together like a worksheet for, is blockchain right for you? So you can actually work through, what business you're in, what kind of problems are you trying to solve? And the vast majority of the worksheet leads to no, don't use blockchain, but we have put that together to help our clients.
Got it. But clearly a lot of activity and a lot of patents and funding and other interest out there for blockchain and the rest of the companies that are on the list. I think we probably have time for maybe one more question here. So a question that came in from the audience that is sort of thinking about the segmentation that you did, Cosmin, in the report about the Renaissance technologies and other technologies. But this question is, what's an example of a Renaissance technology that's sort of coming back now? Do you have any examples of those?
Yeah, one that's really taking a lot of attention in the mobility space and in the industrial space is hydrogen and fuel cells. So 5 to 10 years ago, there was a lot of excitement around what hydrogen can do for passenger vehicles. Looking back now, Tesla and other developers of electric vehicles have kind of taken the win in passenger vehicles. But the resurgence in the interest here is, okay, forget about that market. Let's apply it to large trucking, buses. Let's look at maybe industrial applications, because those are somewhat a little bit more predictable in the routes and in kind of the cycles that they use, but it's also a really hard problem to solve for batteries. So yes, hydrogen and fuel cells is back. It's not back in the original vision that people had 5 or 10 years ago, but it does have the opportunity to solve some still pretty meaningful problems.
Okay, great example. All right, folks, that's actually about all the time we have. We certainly hope that you've enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much, Cosmin, for presenting and for all of your intelligence and the work on this report. As a reminder, if we didn't get to your question, or if you have questions after this webinar about the content or about Lux, please go ahead and do email us directly at questions@luxresearchinc.com, and someone will be sure to get back to you. You can also follow us for ongoing content streams and thought leadership on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can also follow our blog at luxresearchinc.com for, again, that ongoing information and insights. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks again, Cosmin, to you.
Thank you.
And we hope everybody has a great day.